health webinar. We're joined today by Pastor Brad Hambrick. He is the counseling pastor at the Summit Church in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. And Pastor Brad, I'm just delighted that you could be with us today as our webinar guest. Thanks so much for joining.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I appreciate the invitation.
I think you might be on mute. Can you check that real quick?
I am not muted, but I can try a different microphone if we're having trouble.
Bear with us just a second. I can't hear him. I'm getting a message that he can be heard, but Brad, I can't hear you. So need to just get this set up real quick.
Does this help? Is that better?
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
Well, thanks
wonderful.
so much.
Yes.
Thanks so much. So, well, I always like to start our conversations just with a little of the backstory of how people kind of came to be in the role that they're in. So are you the counseling pastor, or you're the lead counseling pastor at your church?
Sure. And so in terms of Summit Church, we are a multi-site church. And that sounds relatively large. Large doesn't always mean good. In church circles, sometimes we can mistake bigger for better. And I think that's a misnomer. But I lead our counseling ministries. And so we have a peer support and recovery group ministry that there's another individual on my team, John Chapman, who directly oversees that. Our church is heavily populated with college and young professionals. So we're a bit of an anomaly, and that probably 30 to 40% of our church fits that demographic. So that means we do a lot of premarital counseling. So we have another individual on our team who oversees the training of our premarital mentors, which we do our premarital work primarily through mentoring. So I do lead things in that area for our church. There's a couple of folks also on our team.
Okay, excellent. Well, so how and why, how did you end up in this place in your life? Did you always have kind of a calling to ministry? I mean, some people very much do have that calling on their life, but others have a more circuitous path to kind of get to where they are. So just love to hear your story.
Yeah, I wish it was more linear than it was. It would be much less stressful if I could say God put everything out there and there was just a series of boxes to check as we went along. But kind of my journey is late high school, early college, felt a general call to ministry. And so at that age, when you're in your early 20s, youth ministry is what you get to do because that's kind of what you're freed up to do. And I've been one of those people who's been fortunate enough that I've always enjoyed whatever role I was in. And so kind of give myself to it fully. When I finished college, was looking to go to seminary, praying about what a good option would be. I went to a Christian undergrad university, had already done work in youth ministry in terms of like my degree program. I didn't want to do a second degree in youth ministry. So Southeastern Seminary had a counseling track. And that seemed like a great feather in the hat for a youth pastor. So I got into that. Once I got into seminary, I started getting old fast and thought maybe lock-ins were not what I needed to do with the rest of my life. And so really did fall in love with counseling. And after graduating, went down to a parachurch counseling center. So it was ministry based. I've never been licensed. I don't take an antagonistic position towards licensure, but everything that I've done counseling wise has been ministry based. I spent right at 8 years there. Down in Augusta, Georgia, running a parachurch counseling center there. Then from there, the opportunity at the Summit Church and Southeastern Seminary. So I currently serve as pastor of counseling at Summit Church, and then I'm a part-time professor of counseling at Southeastern Seminary. That opened up.
Mhm.
And so in all of that journey, I am probably the atypical ministry-based counselor who has 15 to 20,000 direct client contact hours.
Wow.
And so oftentimes those who are in ministry and do counseling, they are more preacher teachers.
Right.
So it's more theoreticians than practitioners in terms of a comparable number of client contact hours. But by virtue of how I got to where I am and the kind of role that I'm in, I think I've been able to accrue a decent amount of sitting face to face with individuals in hurting situations and trying to help with hope and direction.
hmm Well, and we had been aware of your work for quite some time, and Pastor Brad contributed to our online pastors retreat that we held in the fall. Um, and the segment that you created for online pastors retreat was titled "The Bible and Trauma." And so, today that's part of what we want to talk to you about is gosh, what a traumatic year last year was for everybody. And I mean, if you didn't have depression, anxiety, or other mental health struggles, you probably were depressed and anxious at some point last year. So, um, you know, from, I guess, for our audience, from your perspective, how do you define trauma? Um, Whether it's with someone you're working with or just, if you're giving a presentation so that people can kind of understand what trauma looks like.
And as I think about that kind of question, I think it may be helpful to move starting in the conversational realm and then moving more towards a technical or clinical definition. Um, yeah, I think there's the good news is trauma is something that is gaining awareness in our culture.
Yeah,
It's a
definitely.
term that we hear more often. And some of the real advantages that come along with that is awareness, hopefully a reduction in stigma related to trauma, that people begin to identify that what I'm experiencing may be traumatic earlier in their journey,
Mhm.
so that there's less confusion of like, what is going on inside of me. Um, as a term becomes more popular, it also becomes less precise.
Right,
And so the clarity around what it means, the term trigger
right,
is becoming a very popular term
right.
that, um, the folk psychology, if you will, just the everyday grassroots understanding begins to be diluted. Um, and so maybe a short history on the understanding of trauma. Um, if you study trauma as a historian, which you have to be kind of a nerd to want to do that, but I am a nerd and I enjoy it. Um, that it began our understanding of it in military, and so that initially gave the impression that trauma was only a wartime experience.
Right.
And I think we're coming rightly to understand that there's a variety of experiences that can create the effects of post traumatic stress in our life. So,
hmm
various forms of abuse,
Right.
first responders. If you think
Absolutely.
about being a police officer, an EMT, the kind of environments that folks who serve in those professions go through, natural disasters,
Right.
um,
Right.
earthquakes, hurricanes, losing everything, major accidents, house fires, major car accidents. All of those things can have the impact of trauma on our life. And so, maybe two layman's definitions that if somebody hears me use the word trauma and they're like, just, what do you mean?
hmm
And so maybe one way to define it is I'm having a traumatic experience when the then and there is interfering with my ability to respond to the here and now on its own terms.
hmm That's
Um,
excellent.
and so there's kind of that sense that I come into this moment and there's something about this moment that directly or indirectly reminds me of that moment,
Hmm.
and this moment becomes supercharged.
Right.
Um, and maybe another distinction even within that, we use trauma as a present tense term, but most often what we're wrestling with is the post-traumatic effect.
Hmm.
And so some passing of time that we're not, we're not, we would love to be able to prevent the kinds of things that are traumatic, but um, when we're counseling in trauma, we're working on the after effect.
Hmm.
And so it is how the then and there impacts the now. Another kind of layman's definition, and this is meant to be the destigmatizing, I mean, legitimately destigmatizing because it needs to be that trauma is a normal response to an abnormal circumstance.
Excellent.
And so, regardless of age, emotional maturity, spiritual maturity, stature, social standing, socioeconomic status, um, if you've got a dozen people from a variety of backgrounds in every way that I just described, and they're in the same shopping mall where somebody at gunpoint takes hostages, and those 12 people are hostages, whether they're 6 years old, 16, 26, 36, 66, Christian, Baptist, Presbyterian, Muslim, atheist, PhD, GED, the types of experiences that you are likely to have after that. Trauma is just a normal response to an abnormal circumstance.
Hmm.
So maybe just walking through what some of those things are. In the purely clinical world, I think there's 3 symptom clusters that tend to be at the forefront. There's 2 others that I think are worth bringing up. And so maybe that first symptom cluster, if we're asking what is trauma, we've now moved less from the conversational, we're moving towards the clinical, is when I have an experience that is profound, and then I have intrusive symptoms after that.
Hmm.
So that's where emotions or thoughts are intruding involuntarily, unwelcome into the here and now.
Hmm.
So things like flashbacks, nightmares, those strong triggering experiences where I just feel activated and supercharged in that moment, those are intrusive symptoms. Second set of symptom clusters is almost the opposite. It's the constrictive symptoms. It's where I feel flat. And the best metaphor I've been able to come up with that, you may remember as a child jumping on a trampoline.
Hmm.
And when
Right.
you're on the trampoline, it just feels like you can soar.
Right.
And then you get off the trampoline and you try to jump just to see, if you got better at jumping. And it's like you've got concrete in your shoes and you can't
Right.
move at all. The traumatic experience is like the trampoline. It emotionally soars, it spikes. Then I come into normal day-to-day life, and it's like the normal fluctuations don't feel like they're moving at all.
Right.
And so it can feel like I'm very uninterested in my spouse or children or friendships. My ability to respond in worship or to engage with a hobby, it's so muted, thwarted that I just don't feel like myself anymore. Then you've got hypervigilance. It's kind of the third symptom cluster. Um, and the thing about trauma is it always catches us off guard. We weren't expecting it.
Hmm.
And when you've been through a traumatic experience, the implicit lesson that you learn is the most important thing to pay attention to is whatever it is I'm not paying attention to right
Hmm.
now.
Right. Right.
I don't want to get caught off guard again. And so that just deeply habituated scanning
Hmm.
of looking, that I come into a room. I may have never been military,
Right.
but I'm doing a threat analysis the moment I walk in.
Yeah, it does sound like a soldier, doesn't it?
It does. And so then fragmentation, that one is a little, it's less on the clinical side, but I found people find it helpful that uh, when things are fragmented, I don't experience the situation as a whole. I experience it in parts that feel disjointed from the other parts.
Do you have an
Uh,
example of that? I'm not familiar
uh,
with that term personally.
yeah, maybe a spot where people would be familiar that maybe you've seen it and not paid as much attention to it. This is one where cinema has probably been aware of trauma and its impact at a rate faster than the general culture. And so when you go into a lot of your high drama shows, whether it's a movie or a series on television, a lot of your high drama shows, there are themes within the show that would be traumatic if experienced in real life.
Right,
And the plot line jumps around.
right.
Like you never quite know where you are, what's going on. It's not a narratively cohesive plot line.
Gotcha.
It's fragmented, it's jumpy. And after trauma, when that then and there is jumping into the here and now, especially if we've got some intrusive symptoms, my life doesn't feel narratively cohesive. It feels really jumpy.
Hmm.
And then maybe the fifth one that I would put up there is shame.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, when I mean, this is going back to the layman definition. One layman's definition of shame is if I tell you what I've been through, I'm going to blow this conversation up.
Hmm. Right,
You know, like the movie line, you can't handle the truth.
right.
And I feel like I'm carrying a secret. I don't want to, but it's almost like I'm protecting everybody else from what I've been through.
Hmm.
And when I don't feel like I can share, that creates a sense of shame.
Right.
And so, in describing the experience, maybe if I could say, the compliment that tells me I'm getting through to somebody who's been through a trauma is when they hear something like that and their gut level response is, "Thank you, I'm not crazy."
Hmm.
There's words for what you
Right.
get some of what that sense of relief and trust that begins to develop. That's the value of being able to describe in accessible ways uh, what the experience of trauma is like.
Hmm. Well, and I appreciate that you said in either your presentation for the online pastors retreat or for one of your other presentations that's on your website that trauma, something that's traumatic at age 8 or age 18 or age 28, they're not going to be the same. So, a young adult has mental, emotional, familial, community kinds of tools to deal with things that are challenging. I mean, even really difficult things like you mentioned house fire or earthquake or other natural disaster. I mean, it could have a much more severe impact if a child experiences something like that than a young adult. So I think that's important for our listeners to understand that sometimes people process trauma or process things that are bad, and they don't necessarily end up suffering negative impacts from trauma.
Yeah, and that just reminds me of maybe another layman's definition of trauma. Trauma is when we experience more than we're prepared to go through at the time that we have to go through it.
Hmm.
And so there can be the age factor.
Hmm.
And so, if you've got a 6-year-old who's being a 6-year-old in the back of the car and the parent is just not a good fit parent, and they go off and peel onto the side of the road, um, drop the kid off in a church parking lot, spin around to the backside of the church, and just make the child think they've abandoned them. it like, that would be a really rude, awful thing to do.
Yes.
For me at 42, like if you drop me off in that situation,
Yes.
my response is, you're a jerk and we're probably not going to be friends after that.
Right.
But hey, I got a cell phone. I can call. I can get where I need to be. That's more than that child is prepared to go through at the time that they're asked to go through it.
Right.
But that can also be cumulative. So there's the age part, but then let's say you hit a window of time, and in a 2-month window, your house burns, you have to change jobs, you move to a new city, you can't find a new job, you find out that a parent dies, or you get a diagnosis like cancer. The cumulativeness of what is mounting on you in that series of things. Again, you may say, I could look back at any one of those and feel like, I could handle that if it was on its own terms, if it was
Right.
just me and it.
Right.
But you get a whole pack of things like that, and they come at me all at once. There can be a cumulative impact there as well that causes something to begin to result in those symptom clusters we were talking about.
Right. Well, I just want to throw out here while we're talking, if you have any questions that you'd like to ask Pastor Brad, please feel free to send a message in the chat on the webinar, or send a message on the Facebook live stream, and we will work those in as we're able. A couple of things that you've mentioned in the presentation for Online Pastors Retreat, and also in your other work. I mean, you talk about, how if there's an issue with, a child, a young adult having character level concerns. Let's say they are, they're lying about something repetitively, but that there's also been a trauma present, that the trauma must be dealt with first. Why do you say that? And just expand on that a little bit.
So I'll try to illustrate it, then give a little bit of a triage system, and come back to why this may not be as intuitive for us as Christians as we would like for it to be. So I'll take your example there of like, hey, you've got this child who's lying. And we said one of our layman's definition of trauma is, I know if I talk about what happened, I'm going to blow this conversation up. Mm-hmm. So you got a kid on the weekend, and they experience whatever kind of abuse they experience in their home. They come to school. They've got a spelling test. They're distracted, they're fidgeting, they're talking, they can't focus. And the teacher's going, what's wrong with you today? The word you need to spell is fair. Spell fair. And that kid's going, I can't tell you what's going on.
Right.
I'm gonna change my family. I've been threatened. I've been told if I talk about what's going on, then whatever it is going to happen. I don't want to talk about these things. You get the sense of kids are still at that stage of development where they own responsibility for things that aren't theirs just because of that egocentric thinking. And they have to come up with a way, even if the teacher's like, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Well, I have to lie to protect you.
Right.
But yet sometimes I lie and you're grateful that I came up with a happy story. And other times I lie and you're upset with me.
Right.
And so when we say, there needs to be some kind of system where like, how do we, that if we know what's going on, how do we prioritize our care? Mm-hmm. And that's where, just as an introductory level, I offer a 5-level triage system. Anything that's simple is probably simplistic. This fits in that category, but it gives us a primer level introduction to what it is to triage care. And so the idea, sorry, I won't put my hand in front of my face, 5 levels: safety, addiction, trauma, character, skill.
Mhm.
So again, I know people are listening, they like to write notes. Safety, addiction, trauma, character, skill. If there's something higher on the triage system, it gets addressed first. Something lower on the triage system, it can wait. And so we start with safety. If somebody is suicidal, our goal is to get to tomorrow, not much else matters.
Right.
If somebody's in a dangerous home environment, safety is our priority concern. So when safety is there, it trumps everything else.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, when safety is not there, if I
Right.
said that more accurately. Then addiction. If we have addictive level concerns, where mind or mood altering substances are being used to escape, the likelihood that we're going to get any effective implementation on other facets of life that may be really important, we're just probably not going to catch traction on those other things because of the impairment and interference that addiction brings.
Right.
I put trauma next on that list because when the then and there is intruding into the here and now, it's really hard to get good and consistent at responding to this moment on its own terms when this moment keeps getting supercharged.
Right.
And so, then character, that would be, if you had to say the sweet spot of what we love to do in Christian ministry, myself included, it's character level concerns. And that's because when we've got character level concerns, when we're talking about beliefs and values and the way they express themselves in behaviors, I would say Christians focus on character for the same reason that plumbers focus on pipes. It's what we do.
Right.
And when it comes to application of the Bible, the gospel, Jesus on the cross, forgiveness, character level concerns is our bread and butter. And we can point to the fact that, what could be of greater ultimate importance? This is eternity. This is heaven and hell. Yes and amen.
Right. Right. We got the 10 Commandments, right?
Right. But if we come back and, we've got a character level concern and somebody's in a dangerously abusive environment, we got to deal with that safety concern first. If there's an addiction, they're not going to make those character level changes while that they are that frequently working, being impaired by the addictive substance.
Right.
And so as Christians, what I would want us to be able to see is we don't always know. And again, this is one where sometimes we get in these situations, we look back, there's the regret of hindsight, and we go, if I had known that kid taking the spelling test was going through what they were going through at home,
right,
I would have totally handled that differently.
right.
There's always going to be some regret of hindsight. But if we've got some categories and we're like, hey, I don't think this kid's being a knucklehead. Like, it's not like them to.
Right.
I'm looking for a way, and again, I'm at the mercy of their disclosure.
Right.
But that awareness that I at least want to screen through these other things. It helps us ask more informed questions. When we ask informed questions, we present ourselves as a safer person to talk to.
And I think that applies to parents as well. For those who are listening on here as parents, I mean, I've just seen, excuse me, in in various scenarios that, when the parents really try to press in and understand why there is behavior that doesn't seem to fit the moment, that's really helpful and important for your child to be able to kind of unlock what's going on with him or her. So I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but yeah, that when we make statements, especially exasperated statements, we kind of shut a conversation down.
Exactly.
It says this whole interaction is about me getting something from you. It's not about you understanding something from me.
Right. Right.
If we're talking to a child, to use the example that you were just alluding to, and I tend to say bud simply because I got two sons, and so most of
Right.
these conversations in my mind, they come across with male pronouns. But man, bud, this isn't like you.
Right.
Something feels off. I don't want to fuss at something that doesn't need to be fussed at. Is there something going on that would help me understand? That even if you don't get it in that moment, again, because in my mind, a lot of this conversation, we're not necessarily training clinicians. We're talking to parents and church leaders.
Right.
Those
Right.
are relational, tenured engagements where, it's that driving the car later where you get a can we talk?
Right.
When, this is one, it's not necessarily, this is the ministry equivalent to what we're saying. Sometimes people ask in churches, how can we do a better job of raising awareness? And generally, what I think our instinct is when we think about doing something to help, whether it's trauma or addiction or any number of other things that even mental health, those broader big themes of our culture, we think about a sermon.
Right.
We think about an event, a seminar.
Right. A program.
And right. And so this is where, in whatever leadership capacity that we are, the way that I say it, 6 30-second illustrations will do more good than one 30-minute sermon.
That's excellent.
When it's sprinkled, and because, that 30-minute sermon, it happens once a year.
Right.
Just got to hope the people that need to be there are there.
Exactly.
If we're talking about something as weighty as trauma, a 30-minute sermon is overwhelming.
Right.
4 minutes in, and I'm trying not to hyperventilate and embarrass myself in front of the entire congregation. That 30-minute where we're talking about suffering and hard times, and we mention first responders or we mention abuse, that's the kind of thing that just says, this is a safe place. I could ask more questions. And if you give those illustrations and there's a clear kind of, this is where I would get connected to a private venue or where I could talk to somebody with experience in this area, I think we will cultivate more care in our church than the most awesome 30-minute sermon that while it may be excellent, may not accomplish things at quite the same level. So, Beth, are you the host with us now?
Yes, I am. So Catherine she was frozen. She's getting back on.
Okay. I saw that she was frozen and I was like, I'm going to keep talking until somebody else shows up to ask me another question. And here you are.
So we have a question that popped up in the chat. And so I would like to read that question. Maybe you can tackle that one while we wait for Catherine to get back on.
I'll do my best.
Okay. So the question is, what are the most common ways trauma is being seen among young adults during the pandemic? And what tools and practices have been most helpful in helping young adults to work through this trauma? And I know you've been giving some examples specifically with some of our younger population.
Yeah, I think during the pandemic, there may be the aggravation of trauma as much as anything new. And so, the pandemic has been very isolating. And isolation is one of those things that, for anything, is a complicating factor. The pandemic is very stressful, whether that is health related stress, whether that is financial related stress, whether that's all the drama and debate about what should be done. The environment around me is less settled. And when I already wrestle with hypervigilance, a version of that is a struggle with trust. The indirect impacts of the pandemic, it can really aggravate that. And so, when it comes to trauma care, this is the overall concepts I'm pulling from a clinical therapist, Judith Herman. She was one of the early authors that, she really brought the diagnosis of complex PTSD into the conversation with clinicians. But she talks about 3 stages of care when it comes to working with trauma. There's initially establishing an environment of safety. It's just, I got a spot where it feels like home. It's predictable. When I am in this space with these people, in these routines, a lot of those post-traumatic symptoms can begin to dissipate. Then there's the middle part of work that's more disempowering the memory. Like, I can't just forget. Oh, that I could forget. But I can't just forget. How can I remember in a less disruptive way? And then final stage with Judith Herman is reconnecting with life and relationships. In those first 2 stages, we're kind of putting pause on some things, some good things, some things that we like so that we can grow in these areas. Stage 3 is kind of reclaiming my life again. Your question was about the pandemic. In light of what I was saying about it, the pandemic disrupts our environment of safety. We don't know our terrain as well anymore. And so maybe that part of the question that was, what's some of the most effective thing that we can do? Let's go back and shore up some of that environment of safety. Let's just talk to a couple of friends who know us, who know some of what we've been through, and acknowledge, hey, me being off schedule, me not being in the social rhythms that I'm normally in, it's been harder. And it just helps me if you know that, kind of call and check in. That, is it okay when we talk if we don't talk about politics, if we don't talk about these other things that are disruptive? I need some calm, healthy conversations to kind of help me stay grounded. And that's not, if we think of that as a regression, if we think of that in an addictive mindset, and it's like, if I got to do that, I'm going back and getting my day 1 chip. That feels like failure. I think it's much better just to think of it as good self-care. That, hey, life threw me a curveball. That curveball was named COVID. As I come back and look at it, I want to shore this work up. And it won't be like I've got to redo everything that I did in that journey before. It just helps me continue on this other work without this space being slippery.
Yeah, it sounds like, you're underscoring the importance of good boundaries for yourself as well. I mean, it's super important to know not only what you've been through, but to know, what your responses are or your reactions are to adverse things, and to not let it get out of hand before it becomes a full-blown crisis, because of something that's happened here and now that reminds you of then and there. So,
That's what I think, where as Christians, we're not always great with self-hyphenated words.
Right.
Because we think everything that's self-hyphenated is selfish.
Yeah. Yeah.
And self-care, it's one of those things that can often get portrayed in the light of selfishness. But really, I mean,
Hmm.
again, I'm a metaphors, I'm a pictures person. Good self-care is just what they tell you when you get on an airplane. And they're like, hey,
Right.
if we have something and the oxygen mask comes down, put that mask on you before you put it on a traveling companion, because if you pass out, you can't help anybody else.
Right.
And so self-care is about staying grounded, staying regulated, so that the other forms of care for others that I want to do, and that's why I'm self-conscious about self-care, there is more of me available to do that.
Right. Right. Well, and so we talk internally at Key Ministry kind of semi-regularly about suffering. And, it seems like in the Western church anyway, in the Western world, we don't have a very good theology of suffering. It's awfully easy because of, we've been so blessed materially, certainly in my lifetime, um, and even well before that, it begins to be easy to kind of equate any kind of suffering with wrongdoing or not trying hard enough. But boy, scripture is full of stories of people who suffer, and even very righteous people who suffered. So, I mean, even people like, Martin Luther knew that he suffered from probably OCD and certainly anxiety. I mean, he described it. He had a name for, it's a German word. I don't remember how to pronounce it, but he had a name for when he would get into these moods, and I mean, he clearly was suffering. But look what God did with his suffering. He let God have it, and from it, he ended up becoming the reformer of the church. So um how would you, or how do you respond to people who, have kind of this skewed vision of suffering, and that it's, I guess where I'm going with this is it kind of gets to, what do we do with scripture? I mean, how do we apply the Bible well to the situations that we find ourselves in? Not so that we'll stay kind of stuck in the moment, that's influenced by our past, but how do we use scripture well to help us through our suffering?
And I think that's an important question. That um, One of the plumb lines for ministry, in terms for me, and if anybody's looked at any of the resources I do, they've probably heard this enough times that they get tired of hearing it. But a baseline statement for me is the Bible speaks to both sin and suffering, just speaks to them differently. And as Christians, we often get so excited about forgiveness, the beauty of it, the grace behind it, the freedom that comes from it, the idea that God will forgive anything that needs to be forgiven.
Right.
That we start trying to offer God's forgiveness for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about it for a moment, our child comes home from school, they've had a rotten day, picked on the playground, somebody in class was acting up, and everybody had to miss 10 minutes of lunch as a collective punishment, and they're just out of sorts. And we sweetly say to that child, I forgive you.
Right.
We just crushed their soul.
Right.
Forgive me for what?
Right.
What did I was just trying to go down the slide. I was waiting in line. I got pushed. I wasn't the one. I was telling this person to be quiet, and we got but it's weird because it's like you're trying to be nice to me when you say that. You're being very sweet. It's not the harsh voice.
Right.
There's just this dissonance between the sweetness and intent with which you are saying something and the effect of what you're saying.
Right.
And so there, I think what we have to realize is that the gospel, the Bible, does offer forgiveness for sin, and it offers comfort in the midst of suffering. And oftentimes, as Christians, we want victory, we want finality, and forgiveness just takes care of sin in a way that comfort doesn't quite take care of suffering. And so comfort doesn't seem as complete.
Right.
It's not as celebratory, and it makes us feel more awkward, like we're not doing enough.
Right.
Then there's also that I think when we talk about suffering, we can mistake being a victim with having the negative connotation of a victim mindset.
Right.
And that sense of, if we say suffering, then we're saying we're passive and hopeless.
Right.
Well, that's not what we're saying. All we're saying is the root cause of what's going wrong is not rooted in my beliefs, values, and choices on this instant. Right. I'm not saying I'm perfect and innocent about everything else. Just in this moment, that wasn't caused by me. This is some other aspect of the Genesis 3 fall and living in a broken world that's just rubbing up against me in a raw way. And so I think the better we understand that, and we hear some of those calls in Scripture that Jesus would make. Come to me, you who are weak and weary and heavy laden. He's talking to suffering there.
Right.
He says, come to me and I will give you rest.
Right.
The end of Hebrews 4, where it's like, hey, we've got a great high priest who's been through everything that we've been through, so that when we pray, we can approach the throne of grace with confidence that he gets it. That's where Scripture is speaking words of comfort. That yes, it's going to be the end of the book of Revelation before every tear gets wiped away.
Right. Right.
But what we can do is we can offer comfort, which builds hope, which builds resilience, which helps people make those active, life-giving choices, whether that is psychotropic medication or counseling or a peer support group or whatever it may be. That when I'm understood, I will engage much more than when I feel condemned.
Right. Well, we have a question in the chat, and I just want to let everybody know who's on the Facebook Live or here. We've got about 10 more minutes. So if you've got a question, now is the time to go ahead and submit it. So a question came in: can you please expound more on the difference between self-care and selfishness? Oftentimes people who have experienced abuse feel selfish or have been told they're selfish if they take time for themselves. When they're in a safe place and trying to heal, how can we equip them to understand and distinguish between good self-care versus being lazy or selfish? I can break that down or repeat it if you need me to, because it was a lot to unpack.
I've got it up there on the chat. I'm going to take the liberty to put a link up that this is a frequent enough issue that I did a blog article on it. And so that's just resources that everything there is free. But that go-to illustration is where if you're on the airplane, they're like, hey, put the mask on you before somebody else. in that moment, I'm not being selfish. That, comparable with that, if I get an oil change for my car, I'm putting additional resources into the car, and I'm expanding its longevity. That's another visual of self-care. Now, are there people who will use self-care for other reasons? Yes, absolutely. That any good term is going to be misused. And that's one where, with anything, when somebody else has seen a term, a concept misused, then they begin to doubt every time that term or concept is used. And if we're the second, third person bringing it up, we're dealing with the baggage of whoever the first person was who brought that term up. But that's one where, when there's confusion, if we can slow the conversation down, if we can just say, hey, can we talk about what we mean by the terms? Because confusion, the instinctual response to confusion is usually either speeding up or shutting down. And neither one of those bring clarity.
Right.
And so that's one where it's like, hey, when I say self-care, what I mean is, if you think about maybe a classic example where we all give this kind of advice all the time, you got that brand new mom, baby is up all hours of the night. And anybody with any lick of sense is going to say, hey, when that baby naps, you nap, nothing else matters. That's just good self-care.
Right.
There's going to be more of you available when that is needed. And it's just recognizing, as wonderful as a baby is, it's a very disruptive experience to any household when that 100% dependent human being without vocabulary comes in, and the only communicative capacity they have is crying.
Right.
And then crying louder.
Right.
We recognize the need for self-care during that kind of experience, because it allows us to fulfill that role of like, hey, the primary thing God is asking me to do right now is parent this child. I am more available to do that when I practice this self-care. It's good, it's not selfish. So
Right.
that would be an attempt to try to clarify some there.
Right. Well, we've got about 5 more minutes. And thank you so much for sharing your time today. And I just want to wrap up with a question for pastors and ministry leaders who might be tuning into this. What would you, recommend, whether they have professional counseling, biblical counseling in their background or not, what are just a couple of basic things that you would recommend to them when they are dealing with somebody who has obviously experienced trauma?
In the midst of any overwhelming experience, I don't know that there are many things more valuable than a good friend. And so if you don't know what else to do, and in some ways that's where pastors will ask me, they're like, hey, how do I know when I'm in over my head? How do I, my kind of litmus test question there is, do you know the next question to ask and why? If this person's sharing something with me and I'm just not sure what I'm supposed to ask when they quit talking and they look at me and give me a chance to speak, then that means I'm probably not the one to carry the baton of advice giving. But that doesn't mean abandon them.
Right.
I can be a friend.
Right.
I can recommend counseling, but counseling can't replace a good friend.
Right.
There's nothing that removes stigma like a good friend.
Right.
Building resilience and a sense of hope that I can continue on. When I've got somebody who knows me and cares, that builds a lot of resilience.
Right.
And so, in terms of how to be a good friend, learn alongside your friend. It is so easy in that helping role to want to get ahead of or go faster than your friend is ready for. Um, if you can get them connected with somebody who's experienced in caring for trauma, let that person dictate the pace at which things are processed, and you're just there as a sounding board and support. It helps you not get ahead. Um, the American Bible Society has a Bible study that their work is in a lot of um, third world poverty stricken areas, and in poverty stricken areas where you've had wars and famines and various things, you got lots of trauma. It was a resource. Phil Monroe, Diane Langberg were heavily involved in putting that together. That would be something that it's that peer-based ministry level engagement. That there's a resource that we've put together at our church. I'll put that up in the chat.
Well, while you're looking that up, we'll make sure that these resources are in the description on the video when we post on our YouTube and Vimeos.
So that's another seminar material that, in terms of pacing and starting with that, establishing an environment of safety and coming to understand various symptoms, it walks through a 9-step journey that is structured around how the gospel speaks to suffering. So it's a very suffering forward from its theological perspective, hopefully also clinically informed. That would be something that we're saying, how can I be a good friend? Those are a couple of resources that Christians are always saying, hey, let's study something together as I use that to get to know you and be supportive. That's between the American Bible Society and that. I think both of those could be good options.
Excellent. Well, and again, we'll put those in the show notes or the description of the video when we post on our Vimeo and YouTube channels. But Brad, thank you so much for being our guest today. I think this has been really informative. And for everybody who has joined, thank you for your time today. And we will continue with our series on mental health ministry into February. So look for us in a couple of weeks at noon Eastern. Be sure to subscribe to our video channels on YouTube and Vimeo, or follow us on all social media, not just Facebook. So for the Key Ministry team, I'm Catherine Boyle. Thanks so much for joining us today. Take care.